Hello, this is Dave calling, your host for Behind the Meal. On today's Behind the Meal, I'll be speaking with Beth Shapiro from Citymeals in New York City. Citymeals serves one of the densest populated areas in the country, which also happens to be one of the most diverse. We'll learn about the perils of delivering in New York traffic and about the partnerships that Citymeals depends on to keep feeding their seniors. All that and more coming up on Behind the Meal. Hello, and welcome to Behind the Meal. Join me as we delve into the stories behind Meals on Wheels, meeting the incredible people who make it all happen. Today, we'll be speaking with the champion for New York City seniors, Beth Shapiro, the Chief Executive Officer of Citymeals on Wheels in New York. Beth has been with Citymeals in different roles since 2006 and has overseen remarkable growth. Under her leadership, Citymeals has greatly increased the number of meals delivered and doubled both public donations and institutional support. She's also directed some incredible initiatives across the city involving government and private partnerships that I'm really excited to learn more about. Beth, thank you for coming on to Behind the Meal today.
Dave, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, we're excited to learn more about what you're doing and the work and how you got there too. Start us off a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Citymeals on Wheels and who you're serving, the community you're serving.
Yep. Citymeals on Wheels is serving about 22,000 older New Yorkers in New York City. So all five boroughs of New York. It's about 2 million meals a year that we are delivering, making sure that older adults have food 365 days a year, every day of the year, which is really part of our founding.
Yeah, I mean, it's always more than just that meal delivery itself, for sure. And and you're serving a lot of those meals out of your own kitchen that you have, or are you using outside sources?
We actually partner with 30, I'll say, meal centers around the city who are cooking or catering and doing the deliveries. Here in New York, we're unique. Like Citymeals was founded in partnership with New York City's Department for the Aging, which follows OAA standards, right? In that they're funding meals Monday through Friday for older adults. And we were founded to make sure, as I said, that older adults had food every day of the year. So we partner with 30 other CBOs to ensure that meals are going out every day. We also have a distribution center in the Bronx where we procure and pack primarily ready to eat and shelf-stable food and additional produce to go out to older adults. That's really where our emergency arm comes in, which is a large part of what we're doing.
That sounds great. Looking at the area you deliver in, it's one of the most densely populated spaces in the United States. What kind of challenges does that bring with it from a volunteer standpoint, routing? I have to imagine just one building can be, a lot of recipients.
It's very true. We are dealing with, yes, a dense population, but that also varies, right? Some of Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Staten Island are more spread out and almost, I'll say, suburban, not rural by any means. So in many locations, particularly in Manhattan, we have people on foot more than on wheels going out and doing deliveries. And then other areas also use, vehicles. We have a lot of paid deliverers in addition to volunteers. We coordinate about 20,000 volunteers, almost 50,000 hours of volunteer time in a given year. But there's also heavy staff at all the meal centers we partner with who are really forming long and lasting relationships with their meal recipients. Like I think most Meals on Wheels programs across the country have both volunteers and staff who are really forming life-saving and life-enriching relationships with the people that they're delivering to. routing is always fun. Even on foot, it's like, what's the best way? What street has construction? Where are there more bumps if you're, chugging along with like a heavy duty luggage cart and you're delivering bags? It's a little bit different than I'll put North Carolina where I grew up. I'm sure is a very different system.
I'm picturing that folks walking down with these Meals on Wheels luggage bags on wheels here. So
I'll
it is
send
not.
you
They're
pictures.
still on wheels. Still Meals on Wheels.
That's true. There's still Meals on Wheels. We deal with heat, snow. I mean, we have pictures of people trudging through in the snow trying to get their carts where they need to go.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. Some of they're trying to get through snowstorms, or even just trying to keep in the heat, trying to keep those meals, or at the cold, trying to keep them at their temperatures and things like that. It's got to be a challenge.
I guess the good news is that we are close together, right? So
Right.
if you have a 2-hour route, you can come back and get more to go back out so that we can maintain temperature. The bags, of course, we use hot shot vehicles, and then the bags are heavy insulated and will often use they look like ice blocks, but they can be cold or hot, so they can be
Mm-hmm.
boiled to help keep the temperature. It's really surprising, to open a bag and the meal inside is still quite piping hot or frozen solid when you're out in the middle of, 90 plus degree heat in summer or 20s in the winter months. But it works really well.
For sure. And imagine you mentioned all these different distribution sites where you're getting food from. Is part of that just geographic, or does it have to do with like culturally specific meals, things like that?
Both, actually, they are and were originally geographic. They've been consolidated by the city over many years. And there are cultural components both by neighborhood, but requirements from the city. So if X%, of your population has a particular dietary requirements,
Mm-hmm.
you as a provider need to meet those requirements. And we, even out of our distribution center, we have kosher and non-kosher meals, we have halal meals, we have vegetarian meals. New York City is very focused on plant-based, so there's often a meatless Monday or at least a day of
Mm-hmm.
the week that is plant-based. And those meals, as you might expect, receive mixed reviews from older New Yorkers. Some love them, some are like, no, thank you.
Well, for sure. And I got to imagine the cost differences too between these different kinds of meals can vary and make things difficult to plan. But you've obviously done it well.
We try to do it well. It's particularly challenging, I think, during times of emergency
Mm-hmm.
when there are dietary standards that need to be taken into account. And our distribution center, we do 500,000 plus meals out of there a year. During COVID, that was up to about 5 million a year. And
Yeah.
that's when you really want to make sure that if there are dietary requirements, like you and everyone else, we need to make sure that we meet them. And there was a significant time period that we actually only had kosher meals in our distribution center, which was quite costly,
Mm-hmm.
but it also ensured that every meal we delivered would be able to be eaten by the people we were delivering to. And that's critical. What good is a meal if someone's not able to
Correct.
eat
Right.
it when it gets to their door?
Right. Well, speaking of emergencies, we've all kind of gone through COVID. You spoke a little bit about that, but unique to your program as well. That a few years ago, I'm sure folks would remember Hurricane Sandy had come through, and but what kind of it's hard to prepare for those kind of natural disasters. But what things did you see happening during that time for City Meals?
I'll start with Hurricane Sandy. I had been in this position at the helm of Citymeals for about a year prior to Hurricane Sandy. And, a large part of the city was shut down and underwater.
Hmm.
We were very, very lucky to have our distribution center and to be able to get out a substantial amount of meals. At the time, I believe it was 64,000 meals, which I thought we would never beat. We can talk about that in a minute. And we had hundreds of volunteers delivering for us. And we needed hundreds because the work being done was so much more difficult than a normal meal delivery. There was no power. We were in tall buildings. I was delivering with a board member. I think the highest I did was 17 flights of
Wow.
stairs. So to be carrying meals, we had extra water we were delivering to people just to make sure they had what they needed to remain in their homes. And we, of course, added people to the roles. I recall getting a call from a man in Boston whose mother was in the city and was in her 90s, but able to get out to a local market on a
Mm.
regular basis. I think she was on the fourth or fifth floor of her building and could not make it down. And of course, we said, we've got her,
Hmm.
and we were able to deliver food, and we were totally leveraging our warehouse where we have ready to eat meals. They didn't need to be in a refrigerator. They didn't need to be heated. So they were um, what was needed in such an emergency.
Did you see your distribution go beyond just seniors during that point too?
We, for the most part, did keep it to older
Hmm.
people, which was not easy when you're going up and down a building and the entire building is out of power and needing food.
Hmm.
Um, but our budget and our stock, of what
Right.
we had on hand really dictated what we were able to do. Water we were able to get, and we're often just, giving it out. And if we had an extra meal or two, I know that
Hmm.
people were giving them to others who were in need. Not very many, but we're not heartless. I'm sure it happened.
Right. Well, there's only so much we can do. And
Yeah.
I have to imagine there were obviously a lot of other organizations that came out and to help during that time too. That time too.
There were, though I remain pretty uh, passionate about the fact that City Meals is the only citywide organization focused on feeding older New Yorkers across all five boroughs. There are many who do it
Hmm.
more localized within the city or within a particular neighborhood, and are delivering to the door, right? I mean, we
Right.
have plenty of other colleagues at other nonprofits who have food pantries, etc. But if an older adult can't get there, like I'm sure you and others see, it doesn't do them much good.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's also just that daily check-in as well that's kind of missing from that point.
Exactly.
Well, as you go through the hurricane, and then a few years later, there's this other small natural disaster that affects
Oh,
you and the rest of the world through the pandemic. And what changes? I mean, every Meals on Wheels program I've spoken to has seen, saw changes during that period that a lot of them have stuck around. Those things, and good and bad. So, what are some of the things that you saw for City Meals?
I will say that I, along with everyone else, could not have anticipated the scope
Hmm.
of what COVID brought to the world, to our city and beyond. And after Hurricane Sandy, we really had, I thought, a keen understanding of the value of what we do in an emergency situation and what we can do in an
Hmm.
emergency situation. At that time during Sandy, we were in a warehouse in Brooklyn. We had been there, I don't know, a dozen plus years, but lost our lease because it was an area that was being regentrified, which, so many of our meal recipients also face. They're in neighborhoods or buildings that are being redone, and what can they do to stay there? We couldn't do anything, but City Meals made a purchase for the first time, and we bought a distribution center that was twice the size of what we had had at the warehouse in Brooklyn. So we have 25,000 square feet plus a double that in parking facilities. And I never thought we would fill it. Couldn't imagine filling this thing coming out of where we were and what we had done. And as COVID was happening, we began to prepare and to think about preparing of what this could be. I believe it was the second week of March, third week of March, when we ordered a year's worth of ready to eat, shelf stable product to fill the warehouse. And we went through that multiple times. We hired additional staff at the distribution center. So we had 2 full teams. We split them into A and B teams so they never crossed paths. So if someone in one team got sick, we could isolate that entire team and have a whole other group ready to go to work. So they did shifts at the time, and we actually never had an incident where we had to shut down. In the beginning days of COVID, I think we were operating at about 18 to 20 hours a day. We saw both an increase and then a drop in volunteers once people really began to understand the scope. The first days up at the distribution center, masks weren't required. It was really early before we knew what was going on. We were distancing. We were 6 feet apart. I mean, we have pictures and videos of filled to the rafters of people working. And then we shut down the distribution center to volunteers. I think by the third week of March, we said there are no more volunteers in here. We need to keep everybody healthy. And we did, of course, use volunteers for delivery, and deliveries changed. Things went into a bag, they were hung on a door, knocking, stepping back 6 feet, waiting for someone to open. So you could still make eye contact, but there was no closer contact than that. And at the height of COVID, we were feeding 50,000 older adults who needed food in this city.
I imagine a lot of them probably are folks that should have been receiving meals prior, and this is what that last straw that pushed them over.
So many were. I mean, prior to COVID, I think we were at 18,000, the height of COVID 50, and we're at about 22,000 now. So I think there's been some back to a drop off. I think the biggest impact of COVID, of course, the food, but the greater public understanding the impact of isolation that you and I know our meal recipients face every day. I don't think everyday people understood that. And they did then. Hopefully that thread continues now with a memory, because we talk about it. You talked about it. You said that check-in at the door, those eyes on people, providing someone for the person to talk to, even if it's just a couple of sentences, is really critical. And that piece was not so much a learning for us, but learning for other New Yorkers, Americans, people of this world, the significant negative impact of isolation that it has on everyone, particularly older adults.
For sure. And I imagine you probably saw some change in your volunteers. I know most programs, certainly, that sometimes our volunteers are in that same age group as the folks they're delivering to. And of course, they were all, staying home as well.
Yeah, volunteers were nervous and scared. They didn't want to be, close to other people. Our corporate groups, we have a lot of corporate volunteers, thankfully, totally dropped off, and it was interesting for me personally and so many others, right? As everyone was working from home, there was this mix of People are working more, people are working less. There's more time to, throw a load of laundry in or cook a meal. And our work, like yours, it just didn't stop. I mean, I ramped up hours and hours, as did our team, and really made use of the remote aspect of our work when possible. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned talking there that you you were originally from North Carolina. What brought you to Citymeals or New York?
I'll start with New York and then Citymeals. My parents both grew up in Brooklyn, New York,
okay,
and born and raised. And we moved to North Carolina when I was 4. So I was totally raised there, went to college, graduated from Chapel Hill, and 3 days later, I was back in New York. And I came here to work in advertising and marketing, which is what I did for 20 years in the for-profit world before coming to Citymeals. And when I came to Citymeals, I came in as our director of marketing and communications and have been lucky enough to have been promoted to executive director. And then my current title is CEO, as you had said. It's been a long tenure, one that I don't think I imagined at the time, and one that I can't imagine not happening and not being here. I am so proud of Citymeals and to be a part of this organization that does so much good for older people. I say all the time, the people that we're serving built this city for us. And if in talking to you, and if we're talking to other Meals on Wheels programs across the country, they built this country for us. It's a privilege to be able to make sure they get a meal that they need to stay healthy and safe in the homes that they want to be in.
No, I think it's a great way to put it. And we owe these folks everything that we have, so it's the least we could do.
I agree.
Well, and speaking of some of the folks that you're serving, folks that built your city and our country, what changes have you seen over your tenure there and the individuals that you're serving?
Sadly, we're seeing an increase in poverty in older adults, an increase in hunger. Citymeals invested in research a little more than a year ago. We commissioned CUNY, the City University System of New York has an Urban Food Policy Institute. We commissioned them to do a study to look at hunger among older New Yorkers with a particular focus on those receiving meals and those going into older adult centers. And the results were quite startling. 60% say that the food they're receiving is not enough. In a given month, they are hungry and need more food. 65% are surviving on $15,000 a year.
Wow.
Or less.
That wouldn't make it in most cities. I can't imagine in New York as well.
You can't make it in New York on that. I don't think I've shared this. My first salary in New York in 1986 was $14,000. I shared a studio apartment, a tiny apartment, and, ate a lot of mac and cheese and peanut butter. And that was more than 30 years ago.
Right.
It is not a sustainable salary. These people are making really hard choices. Food versus medicine versus rent versus probably in the coming months turning on their air conditioners or even a fan. And the growth of poverty as people are aging and as we're seeing growth in older people is a very scary scenario. And I think that's the biggest change, right? We're feeding people in such a wide spectrum from 60 to over 100. I think we have close to 400 people who are 100 years old or
Wow.
older. And their needs are different, and the progression of their needs are different. And we're seeing growth at both sort of the older old, right? The mid 80s up. I think our average
Folks
age
live
is about,
longer.
yeah, folks are living longer. Still more women than men, about 66% female here, have a history of income disparity that is carrying through. And we're seeing some growth in the younger areas as well. In the 60s range, in people who maybe were unable to keep up with their health and well-being throughout their lives, or have had an incident that is, a debilitating stroke or something that has caused them to be unable to shop or cook for themselves. So this increased population, I'll say concerns with the current economic climate and that impact on funding and donations is concerning, while the need is increasing.
Well, you mentioned the research that you're doing with the university system there. Is that what part of that is what led to? I know you have a couple of initiatives coming that you're working on to end both hunger and loneliness in seniors in New York City. Is that what that some of that research has been led to?
It all stemmed from the research, right? We gained this understanding and then said, we have the knowledge. We can't just sit here and do nothing.
Right.
And our board approved investment this fiscal year to look at several pilots to address both the hunger component and isolation. For hunger, the largest pilot is a breakfast meal, a second meal that we are doing from our distribution center, 30 breakfast meals and about 7 pounds of produce going to, I think right now it's about 2,000, 2,500 of our meal recipients. And we're going to, probably keep it in that range for a while until we get full results. And then, of course, need to look for designated funding for that.
Right.
There are, we expanded our mobile food pantry and a fresh produce program where we already were bringing additional food to older adults identified at most at risk for malnutrition, really limited access to healthy food. And so that expansion and combining those two programs into one is part of the pilots. And we are partnering with a food pantry that we've worked with before to identify older adults who are able to order pantry food from their phone, either calling or maybe even using email or text or an app in the future. But we're giving them a choice. Like there'll be 4 different packages in the month of additional food. So maybe there's a vegan option, a non-dairy option, a meat option, etc. So that we then work with this pantry, they supply, we deliver to get extra food to folks. Loneliness was a little bit slower to ramp up, so we're in some early stages, but we had a friendly visiting program pairing meal recipients with volunteers who went and visited, face to face once a week for a minimum of 6 months at a time, so we could really form relationships. It was a very successful program. The city took over part of that, and then during COVID, obviously, we really scaled that back and moved back to old-fashioned phone calls. And we are expanding the wellness calls, both one-to-one. But what I think is so interesting, we're working with a partner, Life Story Club, and they train moderators. And the moderator is leading a group of 10 to 12 older New Yorkers on phone calls now. I hope we'll get to Zoom. But there's a particular topic for a 10 or 12 week session. And, it could be Spanish cooking
Mhm.
or a book club, mahjong, who knows? And they get together weekly to talk on the phone. And now we've even, with one group, we brought them together face to face. So we're providing, a means for them to come
Mhm.
together so they meet. So it's not only a one-on-one with a volunteer staff person, we're enabling them to connect with peers in order to hopefully continue some of those relationships that they might pick up the phone and talk to each other as well. So I'm excited to see how that continues to play out. And really, a key component for us is evaluation and understanding the impact
Right.
of these programs. And so we're in early assessment stages right now.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, another obviously you can't do these things alone. These are all with partnerships with other organizations. You mentioned the Life Story and things like that. On that issue, and I think of New York City. My one time out there, it's all about food for me. And the restaurants and the chefs and the food scene obviously in New York is unmatched in the world in many ways. Uh, how do you work with some of the restaurants and chefs in your area, whether it be meals or seniors or fundraising, or maybe it's all of those things?
A little bit of all.
Mm-hmm.
So, City Meals was actually founded by a very well known New York City restaurant critic, Gail Green, in 1981. She was really at the peak of her career writing for New York Magazine. And she read an article in the paper about older adults not eating for 4 days because the city funded Meals on Wheels program closed during the 4 days of Thanksgiving. So, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And she was living in this world of what her words were delicious excess.
Mm-hmm.
So she read the article, which hangs in my office with her handwritten notes on it, as a reminder of why I'm here every day. But she made phone calls all weekend to friends in the restaurant community, not just chefs, but chefs, restaurateurs, um, suppliers of theirs, and she raised at the time $35,000 and 6 chickens and called the city and said, "We're going to do the next holiday, which was Christmas. This is what this funding is for." And that was the beginning of our public private partnership with the
Mm-hmm.
city, which remains to this day one partnership. But the restaurant community remained really mostly because of her. And I think chefs and restaurateurs really understand the value of a meal
Mm-hmm.
and food. And like you and I are passionate about what we do, they're passionate about what they do and understand how a simple meal can have significant impact. We have a culinary circle of chefs who help support us. They participate in events. Our largest event, people wise, is coming up in a few weeks. If you want to come to New York and you're a foodie, June 9th is our chef's tribute to City Meals. We have, I think we're at 52 chefs,
Wow.
all cooking little tasting bites for our donors. It's a huge support. Chef Daniel Boulud is chair of our board. I would be remiss not to mention him and his incredible devotion to City Meals. And he um, closes his restaurant, well, it's closed on Sunday. I guess he opens his restaurant for City Meals one day a year for a fundraiser that, we raise over $1 million with the guests in the room eating an incredible meal that he puts together with other chefs that he brings in to support the event. So we're closely tied to the restaurant community in New York and beyond.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think that's something, we do something similar to that here in Minneapolis as well. Obviously not in the same scale. But we have an event every year. We do a little tasting with different restaurants, and it just allows the folks to come in and see, those donors. They're able to see where the money is going that they're giving, and makes it less abstract for them.
I totally agree. Actually, I can't take credit. Our event was started by a few chef friends of Gail's,
Mm.
Larry Forgione and Jonathan Waxman, actually went to a tasting event at Wolfgang Puck's
Oh,
Spago's parking lot in California in the early 80s,
mm.
was supporting St. Vincent's Meals on Wheels in LA. And they came back and said, we need to do this in New York. So it's all that same family across the country.
Well, we're not above stealing ideas if they're good.
Sharing
Sharing
ideas.
ideas. That's why we're here. That's why we're talking. That's exactly what it
Absolutely.
is. Well, what are some of the things when obviously all this costs money. None of this is not cheap. You mentioned some of the work you're doing with your culinary circle and other funding. Where do you see some opportunities for maybe Citymeals or other programs to reach out and to in these times to try to find that those dollars? I mean, I don't think there's any disagreement from anybody that the programs are needed, but some people don't understand how much they cost.
Yeah, people don't understand how much they cost. And just looking at the 76 cents a meal that comes down through the Older Americans Act for
Mm-hmm.
Monday through Friday is really paltry. I don't care where you are in the country, 76 cents isn't getting you the food for a meal, let alone preparing it and getting it to the door. So I continue to support um, Meals on Wheels America and all of us
Yeah.
gathering to push the federal government to increase that amount, maybe increase the days that they're funding. So it's not just Monday through Friday,
Mm-hmm.
but the full spectrum of the week. And I think we all need to do, I'll say, a better job of destigmatizing aging
Mm-hmm.
and older people.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that services for older adults are historically underfunded at all levels, from city, state, and federal. And I think part of that is that people don't really want to think about getting old.
No, but it is a goal for all of us.
It is, right? The alternative stinks. So, so how do we make our cities and our country, I won't even say age friendly, age inclusive? I will give
Yeah.
the commissioner for New York City's Department for the Aging credit in her saying, we want an age inclusive
Mm.
city. And that does take money and partnerships and sometimes thinking outside the box about those partnerships, and people you might have felt were competitive at one time. Maybe they're not. Maybe there's common ground. Citymeals sits on the New York City's fault team, food access lead team, which is a city department aimed at how to get food to all people during emergencies. We were
Mm.
ready.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a group of mostly nonprofits and government agencies working together to plan for emergencies. I will say the nonprofits in this city and across the country that did their thing and beyond during COVID is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think we need to remember those emergency moments and how we can all shine together and keep that top of mind for donors as well.
For sure. Well, speaking of donors, if folks are listening to this and they decide, I want to write a big check to Citymeals, I want to get in touch with them, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you?
Absolutely. Citymeals.org, CITYMEALS.org. They can get information. If they're a New Yorker, they can get information about getting
Mm-hmm.
meals, volunteering, and of course, donating, even if they're not a New Yorker or once a New Yorker. We rely very heavily on our donors. We only get about 8 to 12% of our budget in a given year is government funding. So we are primarily privately funded, and every penny, every dollar counts.
For sure. Well, this has been fantastic. I think we could probably go for another couple hours, but I want to thank you again for being on. And again, I hope when folks are listening to this, they're able to reach out to you and not just that donation part, but maybe pick your brain a little bit about some of the things you're doing and see if we can replicate things around the country. Some of the successful programs that you're doing, and those partnerships sounds fantastic.
That would be great, Dave. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I agree with you. The more that we can share with each other what we're doing, the better we will all be.
For sure. Okay. Well, thank you again. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you again to Beth for her time and all of the work she and her team do at Citymeals. And thank you for listening today. And please share our channel with your friends and subscribe so you don't miss any future issues of Behind the Meal. If you know of any programs you think people would love to learn about, please drop me a message on social media. I'm Dave Colling, and thank you for all the work you do in your community. Bye-bye.